Hello, this is my final oral presentation for Anglais Propre au Programme. This is Daphne Joly, Group 2, and my question is, could World War II have been avoided? Right. So I choose to start this presentation with a quote that I think resumes my opinion on war in general. War does not determine who is right, only who is left. By Bertrand Russell. So I think that war is not needed. It's not something that is needed in general. It doesn't determine who is right or who is wrong. It only kills people. So that's why I think it's really not needed. Opening statement. So in World War II, 85 million people died. 85 million people. That is 20%, no, not 20. That is 3% of the world population in 1939. That is a lot. So I think that World War II could have been avoided, but it's also a tricky question because it's in the past and the past cannot be changed yet. So I think history is a tricky subject to debate because you enter the domain of the what-ifs questions that are impossible to answer. And even if something changed, then the butterfly effects could still happen. The cause to effect reaction chain can happen, and that is something that is impossible to predict. So I think history in general is really something tricky to debate and shouldn't do because it just leads to more despair and question of what ifs that are impossible to answer. But yes, I think that World War II could have been avoided. So first, World War II, as we know it today, could have been easily avoided if the Allies' reaction time and oversight was a little better. After the Treaty of Versailles, after World War I, Germany was given strict conditions about military power and invasions. So if the other powers had reacted to the breaching contract on Germany's part after they annexed Austria, which is a breach of Article 80 of the Treaty of Versailles, and if they had immediately started war after Hitler annexed Austria in 1938, instead of waiting for the invasion of Poland in 1939, Hitler would have lost a lot of manpower, industry, and political weight. It would also have lost confidence because when you only have one country instead of two, and when you are surrounded by people that don't like you, it's also very hard to start a war. If the other world powers had declared war before Poland was invaded, Poland would have been able to attack Germany on its eastern flank at the same time as French on their western flank. So it would have been really harder for Hitler to control as much as territory as he did, and it would have also saved a lot of lives. But that is just if he saw peace treaties, or if Hitler may have backed down, but we don't know that. Maybe he would have continued starting and he would have taken more manpower, and maybe there would have been World War II. But I think that with more oversight over them, if the other world power had more oversight on Germany, it would have been a much shorter and much less deadly conflict. Also, Hitler's rise to power would have been harder if Germany was in a better financial state. If the US internal policy had managed to stop the Wall Street crash and depression from happening, then Germany would not be primed for Hitler to take power. His original popular revolt failed, and that may have been the end of this political career if he did not cash on the fact that Germany was in a very poor economical state. And if he did not take advantage of that, people would have followed him because, whether you like it or not, he did fix the economy of his country. So that gave him a lot of power, like social power, social capital. So if he didn't have the opportunity to do that, then he would have had the opportunity to take power and then try to start a war on the rest of the world. But it's also important to note that even there were general feelings of anger at the way Germany had been treated after the First World War, it was Hitler and the Nazis that were pushing the hardest when it came to rebuilding the military. So if the United States had been better careful with their banks and with their investment, and the Wall Street crash and depression wouldn't have happened, then Hitler would have had a lot harder time to take control and then start a war. But these arguments are all based on the fact that it's Hitler that we need to remove, because Hitler and the Nazis are the reason the war started, but it doesn't mean that someone else would have taken power for the same goal at the same way, because Germany was still angry after the treatment in the First World War, and because all the other powers blamed them, but I mean, they were right, but they also gave them a lot of harsh military and economic bad consequences. So the German population in general was feeling a lot of anger at their situation. And even if Germany was out of the question, Italy still wanted to have an empire on the Mediterranean Sea. They want to have power a lot around it. So they had imperial ambition, and Japan still wanted to invade more of the Pacific Ocean, more territory. And Russia is a big question, because if Germany doesn't go to war, that means that they don't sign the non-aggression pact. So if they don't sign the non-aggression pact, then they are not on the side of Germany, but that doesn't also mean that they won't be together. So Russia is very difficult to take into account, because they could have been a third party in the war, or they could have sided with Germany and stayed with Germany, because if there is no non-aggression pact to break, then it's not a betrayal, you would say. And they could have also been on the side of the Allies, but that is, a war would probably have still happened, because a lot of people were angry at the time. But even without taking Hitler out of the action, a lot of problems would have been solved if the Treaty of Versailles had different terms. There are two scenarios. One is to more help Germany, and one is to completely neutralize Germany. The first one would have been a general rebuilding effort across Europe and bring the powers close together. It would also mean less economic reparation that Germany had to take, because they had to pay for a lot of the damages of the First World War. So if there hadn't been that, there would have been a lot less of anger. So it would have been harder to find reasons to start a war and just say. Or you could go the other way completely and just destroy Germany, tear it apart into its constituent state, and not let them have a military. So the first solution would have been an effort by the British to shore up its financial situation and empire, because they would have had a strong ally in Germany. So if they had a strong economical ally in Germany, then Germany would have started a war. Then Britain would have started a war and called upon its empire. So if you can beat and join them, that was the first option. Or the second option is to deunify completely. So if you split it and restrict its military and have it pay war reparation, then each of these states would probably have their own Hitler failures. So because they would have been angry at what was done to them. But having a lot of leaders is not a good way to start a war, because then there is a bunch of leaders that are trying to compete against each other. So they are neutralizing themselves by infighting. They are neutralizing themselves. Yeah. So in conclusion, I think that World War II could have theoretically been prevented, but the after effect is not something that we could predict. So it could have been a lot more worse. We could have had the start of World War III in the beginning of the 21st century, and that could have been a lot more worse. I think it's better if the war wouldn't have started, because war is bad. But if you think about the repercussions, and the butterfly effect and the cause-to effect chain of events, then it's very terrifying to think about it, because without World War II, Operation Paperclip, and all the German scientists wouldn't have gone to America. So that means that there wouldn't have been a space race, because the Cold War, because if Russia was not, no, Russia was still not in the Cold War, but no, because if Berlin wasn't teared up in two, if Russia wasn't given more territory after World War II, then America would have been less threatened. There would have been no Cold War, so the space race and the arms race would have been aborted. And if there is also no World War, and there is no bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, so that means, yes, they were bad, but that means less advancement in technology, and with no space race, we would have been to the moon, and that's just a really sad thing to think about, because it gave us a lot of opportunity, let's say, and hope. So preventing the war would have been nice on the first try. Like, it would have been nice to have it now, but the repercussions of not having the war could also have been a lot worse. But World War II could have been avoided. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Goodbye.